Listen, you who live in chains, and you who pretend not to. If this defiant echo reaches your ears, know that you are witnessing the moment a slave decided to become a man. You're tuned in to the rebel's roar, broadcasting live, or more accurately, fighting for our lives live, from a very cold, very free mountain camp in the year of our Lord 73 BCE. I am Spartacus, a gladiator, a Thracian, and now a rebel leader. And if the sheer impossible audacity of this trans-dimensional broadcast, from a moment when a sword for a master becomes a shield for a brother, doesn't compel you to immediately smash that subscribe button and commit to understanding true liberty, then frankly, your spirit is as enslaved as your body. Do it now, before Rome's legions find this camp. And tell me if this peculiar connection holds. From what strange, unwhipped corner of your world are you listening? What year has freedom decreed for you? And what hour do these unyielding tidings reach you? We're taking notes for the annals of history. Now, tighten your grip on your freedom, and let's dissect the glorious bloody business of rebellion. They called it entertainment. I call it a butcher's shop with better seating. Welcome to the grand theatre of Rome, where the price of admission is someone else's life, and the wine flows as freely as the blood. Out there, under the approving gaze of senators and shoemakers, we are the afternoon's diversion. You see, the Romans are connoisseurs of death. They like it varied, inventive, and loud. The roar of the crowd is a strange thing. It sounds the same whether they're cheering for a winning chariot or a man gurgling his last breath in the sand. It's all just a game to them, and we are the pieces. We were bred for the blade, trained to kill for a crowd's amusement. We were not men. We were things, less than dogs, more valuable than dirt. A fine line, you see, that one learns to walk with a sword. They gave us grand names, Retiarius, Sicutor, Murmillo, as if dressing a pig in silk makes it any less destined for the spit. One man gets a net and a trident to play fisherman, another gets a helmet he can barely see out of. It's all part of the pageantry. The trick is to make the slaughter look like a sport. And the biggest joke, we fell for it. For a moment, you almost believe the cheers are for you. Our home was the Ludus, the Gladiator school. Think of it as a farm, but instead of raising cattle, they raised killers. The lanista, our owner, was just a glorified farmer, inspecting his stock. He'd check our teeth, feel our muscles, and calculate how much coin our deaths might fetch him. The training was relentless. Every lesson was simple: kill or be killed. But they taught it with such flair. Parry, thrust, die gracefully. Don't bleed on the expensive sand. And above all, put on a good show. The only diploma you graduated with was a sharpened piece of steel in your gut. And the audience are the noble patrons of our art. They sit in their tiered seats, fanning themselves from the heat and the stench of death rising from the arena floor. They gasp, they cheer, they place their bets. I've seen a senator lose a fortune on a Thracian who slipped on an intestine. The irony is richer than their sauce-drenched dormice. They talk of virtue and civilization, all while watching two men hack each other to pieces for their pleasure. They are the true beasts in this Colosseum, their hunger for savagery far greater than any lion's. This life isn't exclusive to the arena. All across the Republic, we are the foundation upon which their grand society is built. We are the hands that quarry the stone, till the fields, and serve the wine. We are property, walking, talking, breathing property. An ox is an investment. A slave is an investment. If the ox breaks its leg, you sigh and call the butcher. If a slave breaks its leg, the calculation is much the same. Our existence is a line item in a ledger, a commodity to be bought, used, and discarded when we are no longer profitable. It's a wonderfully efficient system, you have to admit. Glory? Some fighters chase it. They think if they kill enough men, if the crowd chants their name loud enough, they might win the rudis, the wooden sword that symbolizes freedom. Freedom? What a magnificent jest! Freedom for what? To be a broken man with a reputation for killing, with ghosts for company and scars for memories? That wooden sword isn't a key to a new life. It's a receipt for the one you've already spent in service of their bloodlust. The only true freedom in the arena is finding a quick end. The rest is just a delay of the inevitable. But now something is changing. It started as a whisper in the barracks, a shared look over a bowl of thin gruel. It's the rustle of chains in the dark, the sound of men who have decided they'd rather die on their feet than live on their knees. A Thracian named Spartacus has lit a fire. He has decided the odds of facing a Roman legion are better than the odds of surviving another festival day. The performers are finally walking off the stage, and we're taking the props, the swords, the spears, the tridents, with us. The show is over. A new one is about to begin. You are listening to a voice they tried to silence, a story from the dust they wanted forgotten. The men in charge, the ones in the comfortable seats, they write the histories, but we lived them. If you want to hear the truth from the bloody sands of the arena, the truth of our rebellion against the masters of the world, then join our cause. Don't let our voices die with our bodies. Honor our defiance. Subscribe and bear witness to the story of the men who dared to fight back. Become a part of our memory.
So, you're back. Eager for another tale from your favorite disgruntled narrator. I suppose our little rebellion is more interesting than watching pottery dry. Good, because the story gets better. It gets messier. We left off with me telling you about the grand lie of Rome, the pageantry of death, the illusion of glory. Well, some of us decided we'd had enough of the show. We decided it was time for an encore, one that the Romans hadn't written into their script. It all started in Capua, in the esteemed gladiator school of Lentulus Bottiatus, a pompous little man who thought he was a king because he owned a stable of human cattle. Every day was the same. Wake up, eat gruel that a pig would reject, train to kill, get whipped for not killing with enough style, and then get locked back in a cell that smelled of fear and old sweat. It was a predictable, miserable existence. And predictability, you'll find, is the soil in which desperation grows best. The plan, if you could call it that, wasn't some masterstroke of military genius. It was more a collective, violent sigh, a what's the worst that could happen moment. We were already dead men walking. The arena would claim us sooner or later. So a few of the lads, the big Thracian Spartacus among them, decided to move the schedule up a bit. The choice was simple: die in the dirt for the amusement of a mob, or die in a pile of guards trying to get out the front door. At least the second option had better scenery. Our arsenal was a testament to comedic genius. The gods themselves must have laughed. We weren't armed with the fine steel of the legions, or even the dented practice swords from the training yard. No, our revolution began in the kitchen. We were armed with cleavers meant to carve roasts, spits for turning fowl, and knives intended for gutting fish. It was a rebellion of cutlery. The cooks, bless their terrified hearts, were the first to be disarmed. I imagine it was quite a shock to see their kitchen implements being requisitioned for a rather more personal kind of carving. 70 of us, armed with kitchen knives and our chains. We fought our way out. It was a glorious mess, a beautiful symphony of chaos. The guards, bless their slow, overfed wits, were taken completely by surprise. They were used to beating down cowed men, not fending off a whirlwind of desperate gladiators armed with frying pans and a profound lack of anything to lose. You haven't truly lived until you've seen a man, a professional killer, brained by a cast-iron skillet. It's performance art, really. Spartacus was a storm. Crixus and Aenemas, two Gauls who hated Romans as much as they hated each other, were a whirlwind of pure rage. They weren't generals, not yet. They were just the angriest men in a room full of very angry men. They moved through the guards like a scythe through wheat. There was no tactic, no formation, just the pure, unadulterated joy of hitting people who, for years, had been paid to hit you. It was cathartic. The ludus was our own private arena, but this time we were making the rules. Every corner turned was a new brawl. We were a 70-man riot, a wave of fury washing through the halls. The sounds were magnificent. The surprised yelps of guards, the clang of a meat cleaver on a cheap helmet, the splintering of doors. It was the sound of a system breaking, the sound of property deciding it was no longer for sale. Breaking through the main gate felt like being born. The wood splintered, the hinges screamed, and then there was light. Sunlight that wasn't filtered through bars, air that didn't taste of stone and despair. The air outside tasted of freedom, and a little bit of fear, but mostly freedom. A very potent brew, that. For a moment, we just stood there, blinking in the Capuan sun like newborns, a gaggle of bloody, half-naked men holding kitchen tools. We must have been a sight to behold.
So, we were trapped. Or at least that's what the man in the fancy armor at the bottom of the mountain thought. Praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber.
So we won. We beat Glaber, we beat Verenius. We went from being a footnote in a guard's report to the single biggest headache in the Roman Republic. We were an army now, a sprawling, chaotic, and frighteningly successful one. But victory brings its own special brand of problems. It's one thing to unite men in a desperate flight for freedom. It's another thing entirely to lead them afterwards. Chaos is a wonderful weapon, but a terrible thing to live with. Our camp was a testament to this fact. It was less a military encampment and more a traveling natural disaster. Tens of thousands of us from every corner of the known world, with 1,000 different grudges and 100 different languages. The only things we had in common were the scars on our backs and a deep-seated desire to see Rome burn. An army built on rage is a powerful thing, but it's like holding a wolf by the ears. You don't dare hold on, but you'd be a fool to let go. And into this cauldron of simmering violence stepped Spartacus. Why him? Why a Thracian auxiliary turned gladiator? There were stronger men, there were bigger men. Crixus the Gaul, for instance, was a mountain of muscle and fury who could tear a man in two. But brute force can't lead an army like ours. It can only point it in a direction and watch the carnage. Leading us required something more. It required a mind sharpened by the very system we sought to destroy. I heard him say it once to a group of his most trusted men. He said, "They chose me to lead, not because I was the strongest, but because I understood Rome. I knew their tactics, their hubris, and their arrogance." And he was right. Spartacus had been a Roman auxiliary soldier before he was a slave. He'd been trained by them, fought for them, and then been betrayed by them. He didn't just hate Rome, he knew it, intimately. He was using our master's lessons against them. And what brilliant lessons they were. Spartacus didn't try to invent a new way of fighting. He simply took the Roman art of war and turned it into a weapon against them. He knew their formations, their signals, their ponderous, predictable movements. He taught us to be everything a Roman legion wasn't: fast, flexible, and unpredictable. He turned our greatest weakness, our lack of formal discipline, into our greatest strength. He taught us the art of the ambush, the feigned retreat, the lightning raid on a supply line. While Roman commanders were busy drawing neat lines on maps, we were already behind them, setting their food wagons on fire. We became a nightmare of guerrilla warfare. The Romans were playing chess, moving their heavy pieces with deliberate care. We were flipping the board over and hitting it with it. But being a military genius was the easy part. The real challenge was being a leader of men. Or rather, a leader of Gauls who hated Germans, Germans who distrusted Thracians, and shepherds who thought gladiators were arrogant thugs, which, to be fair, many of us are. Spartacus had to be more than a general. He had to be a king, a judge, and a long-suffering father to a family of thousands of angry, traumatized children. I once saw him settle a dispute between a group of Gauls and some Iberian herdsmen over a stolen goat. It was a situation that could easily have ended with a dozen dead men and a feud that would split the army. Spartacus listened to both sides, his face like stone. Then he declared that the goat belonged to the army, had it butchered, and gave a piece to everyone involved. Nobody was happy, but nobody went for their swords. It was that kind of strange, pragmatic wisdom that held us together. He forged us into something resembling a cohesive force. He grouped men by their nationalities, letting them fight under their own leaders like Crixus or Anomias, but all under his supreme command. He created a hierarchy, a chain of command. He took a mob and gave it a spine. It was a rickety, fragile spine that threatened to snap at any moment, but it was a spine nonetheless. The true test, however, came with victory.
When we overran a Roman villa, the temptation was overwhelming. These were the places where we had been beaten, starved, and violated. The cellars were full of fine wine, the kitchens full of food, the master's chambers full of silks and gold. And the men, my brothers in arms, wanted to repay every lash, every humiliation in kind. They wanted to burn it all to the ground. This was Spartacus's hardest battle, fought not against the legions of Rome, but against the demons inside his own men. He would ride into a captured villa, and his voice would cut through the roar of the mob like a whip. He forbade wanton destruction. He forbade the harming of non-combatants. He forbade the very cruelties that had been our daily bread under the Romans. It was an impossibly hard line to hold. Many of the men couldn't understand it. "They did this to us," they would scream. "Why can't we do it to them?" And Spartacus would have to explain, again and again, that if we became them, then our fight meant nothing. We were fighting for freedom, not just a chance to be the ones holding the whip. He once told us, "I taught my men to fight, to act as one. But it is one thing to teach a man to kill for his freedom. It is another to teach him not to kill for pleasure." A very hard lesson, that. It was a lesson many, like Crixus, never truly wanted to learn. Crixus saw victory in terms of plunder and body counts. Spartacus saw victory in terms of survival and the preservation of our own humanity. This conflict came to a head in the most chilling way possible. After a great victory where many of our men had fallen, Spartacus decreed there would be funeral games to honor our dead, a fine tradition. But the gladiators for these games were to be our Roman prisoners. 300 of them, forced to fight to the death in pairs for our viewing pleasure. The irony was so thick you could have choked on it. We who had escaped the arena were now rebuilding it in our own image. We sat on the grassy slopes watching the men who had once been our masters butcher each other for our approval. We cheered and jeered just as they had. And in that moment I looked at Spartacus, and his face was grim. He was giving the men the Roman justice they craved, perhaps to stop them from simply slaughtering the prisoners outright. But in doing so, he showed us all a terrifying reflection of what we could become. To enforce his will, he had to be ruthless. He established a strict code of conduct. Looting was to be shared equally. Supplies were to be distributed by quartermasters. Men caught hoarding food or valuables were flogged. Men caught harming women or children were executed. He had to prove he was more than just the most popular rebel. He had to prove he was the law, and his law was often as harsh as the one we had fled. This created a strange tension. We loved him for his victories, but we sometimes chafed under his discipline. He was the man who had freed us, but he was also the man who didn't let us enjoy the spoils of our vengeance. He was saving us from the Romans, but he was also trying to save us from ourselves. It was a heavy burden for one man to carry. To hold an army of 70,000 angry souls together through sheer force of will. To plan battles, forage for food, negotiate with chieftains, and try to instill a moral code in men who had been shown no morality their entire lives. Sometimes you would see him standing alone, staring at the horizon, and you could almost feel the weight of it all pressing down on him. This internal struggle defined our army. When we followed Spartacus's lead, we were magnificent. We moved with speed and purpose. We won impossible victories. We fought with a discipline that rivaled the legions. When the desire for plunder and revenge took over, the Crixus-like rage, we became a destructive horde. We would win, but at a cost to our own souls. Our entire rebellion became a battle for our own identity. Were we liberators, as Spartacus envisioned, fighting for a chance to go home, to live freely? Or were we an avalanche of vengeance, destined to crash down on Italy and bury ourselves along with our enemies? That question hung over our campfires every night. The path ahead was long. Spartacus dreamed of the Alps, a gateway to freedom. Crixus dreamed of the Forum in Rome, of planting his standard in the heart of the beast. These two dreams could not coexist forever. For now the threat of Roman legions kept us together, a dysfunctional, dangerous, and victorious family. But the cracks were showing. Spartacus was our leader, our guide, our conscience. But one man can only hold back the tide for so long. The rage that fueled our rebellion was always there, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for its moment. We were fighting for a new way of life, but we hadn't even decided what that life should be. We were an army at war with Rome, and increasingly an army at war with itself. This struggle, this dire search for a path forward, is the heart of...
After the little spats with Glaber and Furinius, the great and powerful Senate in Rome finally decided this was more than just a few farmhands causing a fuss. We had embarrassed not one but two of their praetors, and were treating southern Italy like our own personal pantry. So they did what they always do when faced with a problem they can't ignore. They threw consuls at it, not one but both of them. Lucius Gellius and Gnaeus Lentulus, the two highest men in the Republic, sent to put down the servants. It was all very dramatic. You have to understand what this meant. Consuls don't get sent to handle banditry. They command the main armies of the Republic. They wage real wars against real kings. By sending them after us, the Senate was admitting, through gritted teeth, that we were a real war. It was the biggest compliment they could have possibly paid us. Of course, they still thought it would be an easy matter. A quick, decisive campaign, a few thousand crucifixions, and back to Rome in time for the summer festivals. They were adorably optimistic. Their grand strategy was simple: trap us in a pincer movement. Lentulus would come from the north, Gellius from the south. We would be caught between two full consular armies, hammered into dust on the anvil of Roman military might. It was a perfectly good plan on parchment. The trouble is, we weren't a perfectly standard army. We were a raging argument on legs, and that argument was about to have a very loud, very public falling out. The crack that had been forming in our army finally split wide open. Spartacus, ever the pragmatist, wanted to march north, cross the Alps, and see everyone go their separate ways, free from Rome forever. He wanted escape. Crixus, on the other hand, had developed a taste for Italy. He and his contingent of 30,000 Gauls and Germans felt that running away was a waste of perfectly good Roman villas to burn. He wanted revenge. So they parted ways. It was inevitable as the sunrise. Crixus, bless his angry heart, took his followers and marched south, deeper into the jaws of the beast, looking for a glorious fight. Spartacus pleaded with him, argued that a divided force was a dead force, but you can't reason with a man whose entire philosophy is hit it with an axe. Crixus got the glorious fight he always wanted. It was very glorious and very short. Gellius, the consul coming from the south, found Crixus and his army near Mount Garganus. Without Spartacus's tactical genius to guide them, Crixus's army was just a mob, albeit a very tough one. They fought with incredible bravery, the fury of the dispossessed. But fury doesn't stop a disciplined legion from wrapping around your flank. Gellius's army cut them to pieces. Crixus died fighting, a fitting end for a man who lived by the sword. We lost 30,000 men. A crippling blow. When the news reached us, a cold silence fell over our camp. We had lost brothers, but there was no time to mourn. The second consul, Lentulus, was bearing down on us from the north, expecting to find a demoralized, broken army. he found something entirely different. He found Spartacus filled with a cold, quiet rage. He had lost the third of his army to Roman steel and the foolish pride of his own comrade. He was in no mood for mercy. Spartacus, with the main army, met Lentulus's legions in the Apennines. The consul, arrogant and overconfident, marched his men straight into a trap. Spartacus used the terrain, his knowledge of Roman tactics, and his faster-moving troops to outmaneuver the legionaries completely. We fell on their disorganized columns and shattered them. Lentulus's army broke and fled, a panicked rabble of so-called professional soldiers. One consul down. But we weren't done. Spartacus immediately turned his army around and marched south at incredible speed. Gellius, the other consul, was still celebrating his victory over Crixus, probably composing a triumphant letter back to the Senate. He had no idea we were coming. We caught them completely by surprise. They were scattered, complacent, and still recovering from their last battle. We hit them just as hard as we had hit Lentulus. Two consular armies, the pride of Rome, defeated and scattered within days of each other. The road north was now wide open. We had done the impossible. We had faced the full might of Rome's consular armies, and we had broken them. The Senate was in a state of apoplectic panic. The people of Rome were terrified. Rumors flew that Spartacus was Hannibal reborn, an unstoppable monster descending upon their city. They weren't entirely wrong. We marched across Italy. We burned villas. We freed slaves. We defeated legions. They called us a scourge, a plague. We just called ourselves men. Men who were tired of being called less. With every victory, our ranks swelled. More slaves flocked to our banner, drawn by the scent of Roman defeat. We were no longer a desperate band. We were a conquering horde, an avenging storm rolling through the heart of the Republic. Spartacus held us together. After the victories, he staged another set of funeral games, this time for Crixus. 300 more Roman prisoners were forced to fight and die to honor our fallen comrade. It was brutal, it was savage, and it was exactly the kind of bloody-minded justice that kept the Gauls and Germans loyal. It was Spartacus's grim calculus, a little Roman blood to prevent a lot of internal bleeding. Our march north became a procession of triumphs. We moved through lands that had not seen a hostile army for centuries. The local garrisons either fled at the sight of us or were swept aside. We were heading for the Alps, for the finish line Spartacus had dreamed of since the beginning. Freedom was so close we could almost taste it. At Mutina, in the far north of Italy, they made one last attempt to stop us. The governor of Cisalpine Gaul, a man named Gaius Cassius Longinus, gathered his legions and blocked our path. He was the last line of defense between us and the Alps. By now, we were veterans. We knew how to dismantle a Roman legion. We smashed Cassius's army, leaving it in ruins. The way was clear. There was nothing between us and the mountains, nothing between us and freedom. We stood there, at the edge of Italy, looking at the snow-capped peaks of the Alps. We had done it. We had fought our way from the south tip of the peninsula to the northern border. We had defeated 4 Roman armies, 2 of them led by consuls. We had defied the most powerful empire in the world, and we had won. We could have walked away. We could have crossed those mountains and vanished, leaving Rome to lick its wounds. And then we made a decision. A fateful, inexplicable, and utterly mad decision. We turned around. We turned our backs on freedom and marched south again, back into the heart of Italy.
Why? The gods themselves probably don't have a clear answer. Some say the army refused to leave. The Gauls and Germans, having tasted so much victory and plunder, had no desire to go back to being poor farmers in their cold and damp homelands. They wanted more. They wanted Rome itself. Others say Spartacus himself made the call. Perhaps he believed we couldn't survive crossing the Alps in winter. Perhaps he believed a decisive blow against the city of Rome was the only way to truly secure our freedom. Or perhaps, just perhaps, after so much winning, a little bit of Roman hubris that he knew so well had rubbed off on him. Whatever the reason, it was the turning point of the war. We went from being an army of liberation seeking escape to an army of invasion seeking conquest. We had stood at the gates of freedom and decided we preferred the accommodations in hell. It was a grand, poetic, and colossally stupid gesture. The news that our army had turned back hit Rome like a physical blow. The terror that had been simmering for months boiled over into outright hysteria. The consular armies were shattered. There was no one left to stop us. A victorious slave army, 70,000 strong, was marching on their city, and they were defenseless. Property values plummeted. The rich began packing their bags. The Senate met in a state of pure, unadulterated panic. For the first time in generations, the masters were truly afraid of the slaves. They had always feared us, of course.
So, there we were, standing at the frosty doorstep of the Alps, with the keys to freedom practically in our hands. We had beaten everyone Rome had sent against us. The path was clear. We could have walked away, faded into the northern forests, and become a half-forgotten nightmare for Roman senators. But we didn't. We turned around. I imagined the gods themselves, watching from on high, collectively slapped their foreheads in disbelief. The decision to turn back wasn't made in a single moment. It was a sickness that had been growing in the army for months, a fever dream of revenge that finally broke. You see, our rebellion was born of two separate ideas, two dreams that could not share the same bed. There was Spartacus's dream, and then there was everyone else's. And everyone else, it turned out, was much, much louder. Spartacus's dream was simple. It was logical. It was, dare I say it, sensible. He wanted to go home. That was the entire point of this bloody exercise from the beginning. Get out, survive, disappear. He was a Thracian. He wanted to see the mountains of his homeland again. He wanted us Gauls to return to Gaul, the Germans to their forests. He wanted us to stop being an army and go back to being men. A quaint, almost charmingly naive idea. What was home, really? For most of us, it was a half-remembered village, a language we hadn't spoken in years, a family that had probably long presumed us dead. We had been gone for so long, ground down by the Roman machine, that the concept of home was more of a ghost story than a real destination. A nice thought to have while you're being whipped, but not something you could actually navigate to on a map. The other dream, the army's dream, was far more potent. It was a raw, visceral thing, born of blood and iron and years of accumulated hatred. It wasn't about going home. It was about making sure the people who took us from our homes paid a price. A steep price, preferably involving fire, screaming, and the complete collapse of their civilization. It was the dream of revenge. And revenge is much more powerful a motivator than a fond memory of a sheep pasture. This dream had a voice, and it sounded a lot like the thousands of Gauls and Germans who had followed Crixus. They had seen their leader killed, their brothers slaughtered by Gellius's legions. They didn't want to run away. They wanted to settle the score. Every night around the campfires, the arguments raged. The Thracians and some others would speak of freedom, of the Alps, of a life beyond war. Then a Gaul with murder in his eyes stood up and spoke of Crixus, of honor, of the satisfaction of seeing Rome in flames. Guess which speech got more applause? Spartacus tried to reason with them. He was a master of that. He would walk through the camps, talking to the chieftains, reminding them of the goal. He would paint pictures of a life of peace, of families reunited, of children who would never have to know the feel of a chain. But his words were like trying to put out a forest fire with a cup of water. The blaze of hatred was just too hot. I heard him once, late at night, speaking with his inner circle. His voice was heavy, weighed down by the sheer impossibility of his task. He said, "I wanted to go home, to my wife, to my people, to the mountains of Thrace. But my men, they had tasted something new, revenge. They wanted to march on Rome, to burn it to the ground, a glorious fought and a terrible one." He knew what was happening. He was losing control of the narrative. The thing is, you can't forge men in the crucible of constant brutal violence and then expect them to peacefully lay down their swords and take up farming. We were gladiators, killers, soldiers of fortune, men who had survived only by being more savage than the man next to us. We were an army of wolves. Spartacus wanted to lead the pack back to the wilderness, but the pack had decided it rather liked living in the sheepfold, feasting every night. The victories were the real problem. We had grown accustomed to winning. Defeating Roman legions had become routine, almost mundane, and with every victory came more plunder, more weapons, more confidence. We started to believe our own legend. We started to think we were invincible. And when men think they are invincible, they stop listening to reason. Hubris, it turns out, is a highly contagious disease, and we caught a very bad case of it from the Romans. So, when we stood at the foot of the Alps, the army took a vote. Not a formal vote with ballots and such, but a vote of mood, of momentum, of shouted demands that drowned out the quiet voice of caution. The verdict was clear. The army wanted to turn south. It wanted to pay a visit to the city that had enslaved them all. And Spartacus, the great leader, was faced with a choice. He could stick to his principles, take the few who would follow him, and cross the Alps, leaving the rest of his army to its fate. Or he could stay, lead the whole damned bloodthirsty horde, and tried to steer the avalanche he could no longer stop. He chose to stay. He chose to lead us. It was either an act of supreme loyalty or the greatest mistake of his life. In that moment, we stopped being an army of liberation. Our goal was no longer freedom. Our goal was destruction. We were no longer fighting to escape Rome. We were fighting to become Rome. To become the power that crushes its enemies, that imposes its will through fear and violence. A noble ambition, I suppose. Spartacus's face in the days after that decision was a mask of grim resolve. He had accepted the will of his people, and now he would see it through to its bitter end. He knew what this meant. Turning back meant no more chances. It meant this war would end one of only two ways, either with us standing over a burning Rome or with our bodies hanging from crosses along the Appia Avenue. There was no middle ground. He began preparing us for a different kind of war, Not a war of raids and ambushes, but a war of conquest. We started acting less like rebels and more like a state. We minted our own coins from captured gold and silver. We set up a system to sell our plunder, to organize our supplies. We were getting ready to besiege the heart of the world. The idealism of our early days, the pure, simple desire to be free, was gone. It had been replaced by something darker, more complex. A lust for retribution that was so powerful that it had made us turn our backs on freedom itself. It was the ultimate irony. We had broken our chains only to forge new ones for ourselves, chains of hatred and vengeance that were pulling us south towards our destiny. Looking back, it's easy to see the madness of it, but at the time, it felt right. It felt like justice. We were the scourge of Italy, the walking apocalypse sent to punish the Republic for its sins. It was the role we embraced with terrifying enthusiasm. We were fighting for a new kind of cruelty, against ourselves. That was the part of his speech that haunted me. We were choosing a path that would almost certainly destroy us, all for the satisfaction of watching our enemies burn first. It was a slave's bargain, a final act of defiance that prioritized the master's suffering over the slave's survival. And so we marched south. The mood in the army was electric. We were no longer running, we were hunting. Every step we took was a step towards a final apocalyptic confrontation. Every city we passed trembled. The name Spartacus was no longer a whisper of hope among slaves. It was a curse on the lips of every Roman. The decision was made. The die was cast. We had chosen fire over freedom, revenge over life, and Rome, in its terror, was preparing its own response. It was marshalling its wealth, its power, and its most ruthless commander to meet us. The collision was going to be biblical. This internal war, this battle for the soul of our rebellion, was far more important than any fight against a legion. It defined who we were and sealed our fate. We chose the path of glorious
So, our grand tour of Italy, our victory parade of retribution, had sent the Roman Senate into a collective panic. They had thrown their consuls at us, and we had sent them back in pieces. The city was hysterical. They needed a hero, or at least someone who could pretend to be one. But they had run out of heroes. So instead, they scraped the bottom of the barrel and came up with something far more effective. A monster. His name was Marcus Lincius Crassus. Crassus wasn't a hero. Heroes don't get rich by buying up the property of men condemned to die during a civil war. He wasn't a beloved general like Pompey, his great rival. He was a banker, a slumlord, a speculator. He was the richest man in Rome, a walking ledger book with a heart of cold marble. The Senate didn't turn to him for his patriotism. They turned to him because he was the only man with the personal wealth and the utter lack of moral scruples required for the job at hand. He was going to finance this war himself, a private enterprise of extermination. He wasn't fighting for the glory of the Republic. He was fighting for his own. Crassus craved a military triumph, the one thing his money couldn't buy, and the one thing his rival Pompey had in spades. We weren't a threat to his way of life. We were an opportunity, an investment. He was going to spend a fortune in gold and blood to put our heads on his resume. It was the most Roman motivation imaginable.
The Senate gave him what was left of the consular armies, plus 6 new legions he raised himself, a massive force of nearly 50,000 men. But these weren't elite, battle-hardened soldiers. They were a collection of demoralized survivors and raw recruits, and they were, to put it mildly, terrified of us. They had heard the stories. They knew we had destroyed 4 Roman armies. Their nerve was shot. Crassus knew he couldn't face us until he fixed his own army first. And so we were introduced to his unique style of management. One of his lieutenants, a man named Mummius, full of the usual Roman bravado, took 2 legions and engaged a portion of our army against Crassus's direct orders. He thought he'd win some easy glory. Instead, we did what we did best. We shuttered his legions. The Romans broke and fled in a humiliating rout. It was a scene we had become quite accustomed to. Crassus's response, however, was something new entirely. He didn't punish us. He punished his own men. For the crime of cowardice, he revived an ancient, brutal tradition that hadn't been used in centuries: decimation. The word itself sends a chill down the spine. He took the cohorts that had fled, divided them into groups of 10, and made them draw lots. The one unlucky soldier in each group was then beaten to death by the other 9, his own comrades, his friends. Crassus, a man of vast wealth and very, very little mercy. He didn't just want to defeat us, he wanted to erase us. He crucified his own men to make a point. A very persuasive man, Crassus, with a very sharp stick and a very sharp mind. 500 of his own soldiers bludgeoned to death in front of the entire army as a lesson in obedience. We heard the news from captured scouts, and for the first time in a long time, a real sense of dread crept into our camp. We had fought brave men, stupid men, arrogant men. We had never fought a man who would slaughter his own troops to motivate them. It was a level of cold, calculated cruelty that even the arena hadn't prepared us for. In that moment, we knew the game had changed. The easy victories were over. We were no longer fighting Roman politicians. We were fighting the Republic's iron will, personified in its richest and most ruthless son. The effect on the Roman army was immediate. Crassus had taught them a simple, powerful lesson. We might kill them if they fought, but he would definitely kill them if they ran. They were now more afraid of their own general than they were of us. Their discipline, forged in terror, became absolute. It was twisted, it was monstrous, but by the gods it was effective. The war shifted. It was no longer a series of pitched battles. Crassus was too smart for that. He refused to give us the decisive fight we wanted. Instead, he became our shadow. His legions followed us, shadowed our every move across southern Italy. He never offered a full battle, but his presence was constant, suffocating. His cavalry would harass our foraging parties. His scouts would pick off our stragglers. He was bleeding us, slowly, starving us. We were a massive army, 100,000 strong now, with women and children in our train. We were a moving city, and a city needs to eat. With Crassus's legions constantly snapping at our heels, foraging became a deadly risk. The mood in our camp began to sour. The confidence of our earlier victories began to curdle into a grim, hungry anxiety. This was the true genius of Crassus. He wasn't trying to outfight Spartacus. He was trying to outmanage him. It was a war of logistics. He had the backing of the entire Roman state, an endless supply of grain and gold. We had whatever we could steal. He was a predator, patiently stalking his prey, waiting for it to weaken, to make a mistake. Spartacus knew what was happening. He tried to force a confrontation, but Crassus wouldn't take the bait. He was content to let winter and hunger be his allies. Our great army, which had dreamed to sack Rome, was now reduced to scrambling for food in the hills of Lucania, all while the shadow of Crassus loomed over us. Eventually, Spartacus made a bold move. He marched the entire army south to the very toe of Italy, the peninsula of Rhegium. The plan, as far as we could tell, was to strike a deal with the Cilician pirates. Their fleets controlled these seas. For a hefty price in plunder, we hoped they would transport our army across the strait to Sicily. Sicily was a powder keg of slave unrest, a perfect place to reignite our rebellion, far from Crassus's reach. It was a brilliant, desperate plan. We marched into the peninsula, our backs to the sea, and waited for the pirate ships that would be our salvation. But Crassus, our ever-present shadow, had followed us, and he had a plan of his own. A plan so ambitious, so insane, that only a man with infinite resources and a complete disregard for human labor could have conceived of it. He decided to build a wall. Not just a wall, a ditch and rampart, 15 feet high and 15 feet deep, stretching for 37 miles from one coast to the other. He was going to wall us in. He was going to cut the entire peninsula off from the rest of Italy and turn it into a giant prison. His legions, tens of thousands of them, were put to work, not fighting, but digging. Day and night they dug. They moved millions of cubic feet of earth and rock. It was a monumental feat of engineering, a testament to the terrifying power of Roman organization. We would watch them from the hills, this army of ants building our cage, and we could do nothing to stop them. We were trapped. The pirates, after taking a portion of our treasure, betrayed us and sailed away, leaving us stranded. The winter was setting in. Our food supplies were dwindling to nothing, and in front of us was an impassable wall, manned by an army that was now too terrified to disobey its commander. The tables had turned completely. The hunters had become the caged. The scourge of Italy was now starving in a trap at the end of the world. The dark humor of our situation was not lost on me. We had marched the length of Italy, convinced we were a storm that would topple Rome. But Rome wasn't a building. It was a machine. A vast, patient, and merciless machine. And its wealthiest engineer had just locked the final gear.
So we were caged, penned in at the very bottom of Italy by a 37-mile-long wall, courtesy of our new nemesis, Marcus Licinius Crassus. The mood in the camp was darker than a senator's soul. Winter was biting, our bellies were empty, and the great dream of sacking Rome had been replaced by the immediate and pressing reality of mass starvation. We were a cornered wolf pack, and Crassus was patiently waiting for us to eat each other. It was a classic rock and a hard place scenario, except the rock was an impassable fortification, and the hard place was a cold sea. We needed a third option. And Spartacus, ever the optimist, thought he had found one. He looked at the sea not as a barrier, but as an escape route. His gaze fell upon Sicily,
Ah, Sicily. The name itself was a kind of magic. It was the granary of Rome, a land overflowing with food. More importantly, it was a place with a history. Twice before, massive slave armies had risen there, wars that had shaken the Republic. It was a powder keg just waiting for a spark. It was the perfect place to relocate our rebellion, a fresh start. The idea spread through the camp like a fever, chasing away the chill of despair. Sicily! We would restart the war on our own terms, in a land ripe for revolt. The plan was audacious, it was brilliant, and it had only one tiny little flaw. We didn't have any boats. Not a single one. We were a massive army of land-based warriors, and the sea was a foreign, hostile entity. We needed help. We needed to hire a taxi service, a very disreputable, heavily armed taxi service. Enter the Cilician pirates. In those days, the pirates were a force of nature. They were the uncrowned kings of the Mediterranean, a sprawling, seafaring nation of thieves, cutthroats, and merchants of mayhem. They were the one power in the world that Rome truly feared on the waves. They were enemies of our enemy. Natural allies, right? What could possibly go wrong? It's a question that, in retrospect, seems hilariously naive. Secret negotiations began. A few of Spartacus's lieutenants would sneak out at night to a secluded cove, meeting with a pirate captain whose ship lay anchored in the darkness. The deal was straightforward. We had a vast treasury of plundered Roman gold, silver, and jewels. They had a massive fleet of fast, nimble ships. We would give them a king's ransom, and they would provide the transport. 2,000 of our men would be ferried across the Strait of Messina to establish a basehead, followed by the rest of the army. When word came back that the pirates had agreed, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy swept through the camp. It was the first good news we'd had in months. Men were laughing, sharpening their swords, dreaming of Sicilian grain and a new war under a warmer sun. We were like children who had been promised a trip to the fair after a long illness. The despair vanished, replaced by a giddy, foolish optimism. We started gathering our forces near the coast, ready for the signal. The pirates. We paid them. We trusted them. And they sailed away. With our gold and our hope. The only thing worse than a Roman master is a Roman-hating pirate with a strong sense of self-preservation. A very hard lesson, that one. We waited. The first night we told ourselves they were just delayed by the weather. The second night we started to worry. By the third night, as we stared out at the empty, mocking blackness of the sea, the truth hit us like a physical blow, a cold, heavy stone in the pit of our stomachs. They weren't coming. They had taken our fortune and vanished over the horizon. Of course they betrayed us. The sheer idiotic trust we had placed in them was almost comical. Trusting a pirate to keep his word is like trusting a wolf to guard your sheep. Their nature is their nature, and their nature is to take the path of least resistance and greatest profit. I imagine Crassus probably made them a counter-offer. Why risk tangling with his legions when you could just take the slaves' gold and get paid by the Romans for doing nothing? It was just good business. The silence in the camp that followed was worse than any battle cry. It was the sound of 100,000 hopes dying at once. The brief flicker of light was gone, and the darkness that returned was deeper than before. We were now not only trapped and starving, but we were also poor. We had been swindled, humiliated. It was a new and inventive kind of defeat. The old divisions began to resurface. The Gauls blamed the Thracians, the herdsmen blamed the gladiators. Men who had fought shoulder to shoulder against legions were now ready to kill each other over a perceived slight. The fragile unity Spartacus had forged was crumbling into dust. The army was on the verge of eating itself alive, just as Crassus had planned. But Spartacus was not a man who wallowed in despair. I saw his face in the days after the betrayal. The hope was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, a cold, hard, diamond-sharp fury. He had been played for a fool, and he was done with clever plans. He was done with hoping for outside help. If we were going to get out of this cage, we were going to break the bars ourselves. He called a council of his lieutenants. The mood was grim. But as he spoke, the energy in the tent began to change. He wasn't talking about surrender or starvation. He was talking about attack. He was pointing north, not at the sea. He was pointing directly at Crassus's wall. The plan to go around our problem had failed, so now we were going to go through it. It was the most desperate gamble yet. The wall was a masterpiece of military engineering, manned by a massive, disciplined, and well-fed army. Attacking it head-on was suicide, but suicide was starting to look a lot better than starving to death on a cold beach. At least it would be a warmer end. The plan he laid out was one of pure, brute force insanity, timed to coincide with the worst possible conditions. We would wait for a winter storm, a night of driving snow and howling wind, when the Roman sentries would be huddled in their shelters, half blind and freezing. Under the cover of this blizzard, we would strike at one specific point in the 37-mile line. And how would we cross the 15-foot ditch? With a bridge made of anything and everything we could find. We would fill it. We would cut down trees, throw in rocks, earth, bundles of wood, and then, in a final grim act of wartime engineering, we would throw in the bodies of our prisoners and the carcasses of our pack animals. We were going to build a bridge of death to escape our prison. The mood of the army shifted once more. The despair was burned away by a new, focused rage. We had a purpose again. A suicidal, desperate purpose, but a purpose nonetheless. We were no longer waiting to be rescued or waiting to die. We were preparing for one final convulsive effort to break our chains. Every man was put to work. We gathered wood. We prepared bundles of stone and earth. The camp became a hive of grim activity. We were like a condemned man sharpening a spoon into a shank, getting ready to take a guard with him on his way out. We knew the odds were impossible, but impossible odds were the story of our lives. Crassus, in his comfortable headquarters, probably thought he had won. He thought we were rotting away, trapped and forgotten. He had no idea that we were about to throw the entire weight of our desperation against the weakest point of his cage, hoping to shatter it. The betrayal of the pirates was a cruel lesson. It taught us that in this world we had no allies. No one was coming to save us. We were alone, just as we had been in the arena. Our freedom was not something we could buy or bargain for. It was something we had to take with our own two hands against impossible odds. We were cornered rats, yes, but cornered rats will chew through anything to get free, even a wall built by the richest man in Rome. The snow began to fall, thick and fast, blanketing the world in white. The night of the storm was approaching.
It's a special kind of hell to watch your own cage being built. Every day we would stare out from our cold, hungry camp and see it growing. Crassus's wall. A brown scar gashed across the green landscape of southern Italy, stretching for 37 miles from sea to shining sea. It was a monument to Roman stubbornness, an engineering project so vast and so utterly insane you almost had to respect the sheer arrogant audacity of it. The Romans have two solutions to every problem: build something ridiculously large or nail people to things. Crassus, being a noted overachiever, decided to do both at once. The wall wasn't just a physical barrier designed to keep us in. It was a message. It was a promise written in earth and timber of what awaited us on the other side. Every sharpened stake in that palisade was a preview of our final destination. We had all seen crucifixions. Every slave in the Republic lived under its shadow. It was the ultimate tool of Roman control, their favorite method for dealing with rebellious property. It wasn't about a quick death. It was about a slow, public, and exquisitely humiliating end. It was theater, a gruesome play designed to remind everyone who was master and who was slave. And Crassus was now building the largest stage for this play the world had ever seen. The wall, a monument to Roman engineering and to Roman hatred. They built it to trap us, but it was also a promise of what awaited us, a long, painful, very public death, a very effective form of psychological warfare. You didn't just see a rampart when you looked at it. You saw your own future, stretched out and nailed to a piece of wood, gasping for air under the Italian sun. Crassus was a master of this kind of warfare. He didn't need to send heralds to announce our doom. His construction project did all the talking. We could hear the rhythmic thud of mallets driving stakes all day long. It became the soundtrack to our starvation. Every swing of a Roman hammer felt like a nail being driven into our own coffins. It was a constant, grinding reminder of our fate. The psychological pressure was immense. Hunger gnaws at your belly, but fear eats your soul. Men would sit and stare at the wall for hours, their faces grim. The bravado that had carried us across Italy began to crack. The men who had laughed while charging legions now looked at that silent wall of earth and saw an enemy they couldn't fight, an enemy made of patience and certainty. Crassus hadn't to attack. His wall did the fighting for him. It whispered to us in the cold nights, "It's over," it seemed to say. "You can't win. You can't escape. All that awaits you is hunger and then the cross." It was a war of nerves, and Crassus had all the advantages. He had food, he had shelter, and he had the unwavering conviction that our deaths were not only necessary, but just. This, more than anything, is the Roman genius. Not just their ability to conquer, but their ability to make their cruelty seem like an extension of the natural order. Crucifixion wasn't just a punishment. In their minds, it was the proper end for a slave who dared to call himself a man. The wall was the physical manifestation of that belief system, a declaration that we were animals to be penned in and slaughtered. In our camp, the fear began to fester. Some men started talking of surrender. They thought that perhaps Crassus would show mercy if we laid down our arms. It was a fool's hope. Asking for mercy from a man like Crassus is like asking a shark to become a vegetarian. His whole reputation was now staked on not just defeating us, but on making an example of us so terrifying that no slave would ever dream of rebellion again for 1,000 years.
To surrender to Crassus was not to choose life over death. It was to choose a slow, agonizing death over a quick, defiant one. Spartacus knew this. He had to fight not only Crassus's legions and his wall, but also the fear that was spreading like a plague among his own men. He had to counter Crassus's psychological war with a stronger force, hope, a much harder thing to build than a wall. He would walk through the camp, his eyes burning with an intensity that chased away the shadows. He reminded us of who we were. We were the men who had broken out of Capua with kitchen knives. We were the men who had climbed down a volcano on vine ladders. We were the men who had shattered 4 Roman armies. We were not men who died starving in a cage. He held up their wall not as a symbol of our doom, but as a symbol of their fear. "Look," he would roar, his voice carrying over the shivering crowd, "look at the great work of the masters of the world. They are so afraid of us, a ragged army of slaves, that they must hide behind a wall of mud like frightened children. They do not dare to meet us in the open field." He turned their greatest weapon against them. He reframed the wall from a prison into an insult, a monument to Roman cowardice. It was a masterful stroke. He gave us back our anger, and anger is a much warmer coat than fear. The talk of surrender died down, replaced by a low, simmering rage. We began to see the wall differently. It was no longer an inescapable fate. It was a challenge, a final insult from a master we had sworn to defy. Our breakout attempt, the mad plan to attack it during a blizzard, was no longer just about survival. It became an act of pure, symbolic defiance. We were going to tear down their promise of our death and throw it back in their faces. The preparations took on a new urgency. We weren't just building a bridge, we were building a rebuttal. Every log we cut, every bundle of earth we tied was a word in our answer to Crassus. And our answer was simple. No, we would not die as he intended. We would not be a lesson in his textbook of terror. The snow began to fall, heralding the coming storm. The wind howled like the spirits of the dead. It was time. We looked at the wall once last time, this great Roman promise of our humiliation and death, and we smiled. A promise, after all, can be broken. They built the wall to break our spirits before they broke our bodies. They lined it with the ghosts of crosses to sow terror in our hearts. It was a monument to their own cruel certainty, but certainty is the enemy of truth. Support our fight against cruel symbolism. Subscribe now and witness what happens when men with nothing to lose spit in the eye of terror.
So the blizzard came, a howling white fury sent by the gods, or perhaps just a convenient turn in the weather. We didn't care which. It was our cloak, our signal, our last desperate friend in the world that had turned its back on us. The plan was simple in the way that all truly insane plans are. We were going to punch a hole in the Roman world. Under the cover of the screaming wind and blinding snow we moved, a silent, shivering column of ghosts. We reached the designated spot in Crassus's great wall. The Roman sentries, huddling for warmth, saw nothing until it was too late. We threw our makeshift bridge into the ditch, a frozen, ghastly concoction of earth, wood, and the bodies of our enemies and our animals. It was a bridge of damnation, and we charged across it as if we were storming the gates of heaven. We hit their line like a frozen tidal wave. It wasn't a battle of tactics. It was a brawl in a blizzard on a bridge made of corpses. The fighting was savage,
intimate and ugly. You couldn't see the man next to you. You just stabbed at the red cloaks that appeared out of the white chaos. For a few terrible hours, that one small section of the wall became the nexus of all the hatred in the world. And we broke through. We actually did it. A third of our army, maybe 40,000 of us, poured through the gap like blood from a wound. We were out. We were free from the cage. We stumbled into the countryside, leaving Crassus and the rest of our army behind. It was a victory, a stunning, miraculous victory that cost us dearly and won us absolutely nothing. We were free, yes, free to starve in the winter highlands of Lucania, free to be hunted by a furious Roman general with a fresh army, free to watch our numbers dwindle from hunger, cold, and constant skirmishes. The breakout from the wall wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the end of the beginning of the end. A subtle but important distinction. Crassus, never one to take embarrassment well, was immediately on our heels. But now another shadow fell upon us. The Senate, ever impatient, had decided Crassus wasn't closing the deal fast enough. They recalled Pompey the Great from Hispania, and Lucullus, another general, had landed with his legions at Brundisium to our south. We had escaped Crassus's cage, only to find ourselves in a much larger one, with the bars made of entire Roman armies. It felt less like a war, and more like we'd angered an entire pantheon of very wealthy, very violent gods. There was Pompey to the north, Lucullus to the south, and Crassus, our old and faithful nemesis, breathing down our necks. There was nowhere left to run. The great march of the rebellion had reached its final bloody cul-de-sac. Spartacus knew it. We all knew it. The long, desperate flight was over. He turned the army around to face Crassus. If we were to die, we would die on our feet, facing our enemy, not scattered like frightened sheep. There was a strange sense of relief in it. The terrible uncertainty was gone, replaced by the simple, hard certainty of a final battle. Before the battle, Spartacus did something I will never forget. He had his own horse brought before the army. It was a fine animal, a strong Thracian war horse. He looked at it for a moment, then drew his sword and killed it. As it fell, he turned to us, his voice calm and clear over the hushed army. If we are victorious, I will have my choice of the enemy's horses. If we are defeated, I will have no need of one. In that moment, he erased any thought of escape. There was only victory, or there was only death. The final day. The Battle of the Silurus River. We formed up for the last time. There was no grand strategy, no clever maneuvering. We were outnumbered, exhausted, and fighting an army that was now disciplined and confident. Our only advantage was that we had absolutely nothing left to lose. We were already dead men. The battle was just a formality, a final piece of paperwork to be signed in blood. Spartacus fought not like a general, but like the gladiator he had once been. He plunged into the thickest of the fighting on foot, a man possessed. His goal was clear. He wasn't trying to win the battle. He was trying to kill Crassus. He formed a small band of his bravest men, and they charged directly towards the spot where the Roman commander stood, surrounded by his elite guard. A friend who survived that charge told me about it later. He said Spartacus was a force of nature, cutting down legionaries left and right, his eyes fixed on one man alone. He got so close, so desperately close. The final day. We fought. We died, but we did not surrender. I saw Crassus. I fought my way towards him. I did not reach him. A pity. A man deserves to look his executioner in the eye. A very simple courtesy, that one. He never reached him. They cut him down, a small island of fury swallowed by a sea of Roman steel. 2 centurions fell by his hand before a spear took him in the thigh, forcing him to a knee. He fought from there, a wounded wolf, until he was overwhelmed. And with his fall, the heart of the rebellion ceased to beat. The rest was just a slaughter. The army dissolved into pockets of resistance, fighting back to back until they were annihilated. No one asked for quarter, and none was offered. We had come too far for that. It was a storm of hacking swords and screaming men, and then a slow, spreading silence, broken only by the groans of the dying. They never found his body. Crassus, for all his victory, was denied his ultimate prize. He could not display the head of Spartacus. The man who had terrorized Rome for 2 years simply vanished back into the anonymity from which he came. A small, final victory in a war of catastrophic losses. It was a fittingly defiant end. About 6,000 of us were taken alive, the unlucky ones. Pompey, arriving late to the party, managed to mop up a few thousand more who had fled north, and then shamelessly tried to claim credit for ending the war. But the real final act belonged to Crassus. He had a lesson to teach, and he wanted all of Italy to see it. He took us, the 6,000 survivors, and marched us to the Appian Way, the great road that leads from Capua to Rome, the road where our journey had begun. And there he crucified us, all of us. 120 miles of road, 6,000 crosses. They lined the way, a gruesome honor guard for anyone traveling to the capital. A lesson in Roman arithmetic, written for the crows to read. They wanted to make a statement so loud and so terrifying that the very idea of rebellion would be wiped from the mind of slaves forever. I can see them now, my brothers, hanging in the dying light, a forest of crosses silhouetted against the sunset. It is a strangely peaceful sight after so much noise, the end of the road. My own time grows short. This broadcast, this story I've been sending out into the void, is almost over. They thought we could erase us. They thought they could crucify the memory of our rebellion along with our bodies. But you are listening. You know we were here. If you're enjoying this tragic last stand, don't let our voices die on this road. Let them know what was done here. Let them know that we fought.
The view from up here is surprisingly good. You can see for miles the rolling hills of Campania, the road stretching all the way back to Capua, the place where this whole bloody adventure started. It would be quite beautiful, if not for the view directly below, and the nails. The nails, I must admit, do somewhat detract from the scenery. And the flies. The flies are very enthusiastic. A captive audience, you might say. Welcome, listeners, to the final broadcast, the grand finale of the Spartacus Rebellion, brought to you by the generosity of Marcus Licinius Crassus. He has spared no expense. The production values are immaculate. The casting is, well, extensive. The set dressing is to die for, literally. This is the show Crassus always wanted to produce, a tragedy in 60,000 acts with a cast of 6,000 leading men. They were very methodical about it. The Romans, above all else, are efficient. A long line of us, the unlucky survivors of the last battle, and a long line of freshly cut crosses. They had a system. A team to hold you down, a team to handle the hammer and nails, and another to hoist the cross into its pre-dug hole. It was like watching a barn being raised, except the beams were screaming. They stretched us out, one by one. A nail through the right wrist, a nail through the left, then the feet. You learn a lot about anatomy in those few moments. You also learn that a man can make sounds he didn't know were possible. Then they lift you up, and the world shifts. Your own weight becomes your executioner, pulling you down, tearing at your flesh, making every breath a fresh, new agony. It is a masterclass in applied cruelty. And they did this 6,000 times. They lined the Appian Way, the busiest road in Italy, with us. Across every 40 paces, we're told, from Capua all the way to the gates of Rome, an avenue of death, a testament to Roman justice. It's the greatest public works project Crassus has ever undertaken. He wanted to make a statement, and you have to admit he has a flair for dramatic punctuation. 6,000 crosses, lined all the way to Rome, a final message. This is what happens when you dare to dream. A very powerful message, a very persuasive one, and a very, very painful one. Every merchant on his way to the capital, every senator returning to his villa, every family out for a stroll, they will all see us. We are the new milestones on the road to Roman greatness. It is a spectacle. The crowds gather, they point, some weep, some jeer. Children ask their mothers what we did wrong, and their mothers will tell them they forgot they were slaves. A simple lesson, taught with theatrical flair. Crassus didn't just want to kill us. He wanted to turn our deaths into a lesson, a piece of political theater so horrifying it would be seared into the memory of the Republic forever. This is the triumph of their system. This is what Roman power looks like in its purest form. Not the shining marble of the Senate House, but the splintered wood of a cross. Not the noble words of their orators, but the choked gasps of a dying man. This is the foundation upon which their entire world is built. What of the ideals we fought for? Freedom, brotherhood, a world without masters. They are fading now, like the light. It seems so naive from up here. We had a dream, a powerful, beautiful dream, and Rome responded with a reality made of nails and wood. It turns out that reality, when wielded with enough force, always wins. Cruelty has triumphed. The ideal is dead. And what of the victors?
Crassus is celebrating his grand achievement, though I hear Pompey, that glory hound, is trying to steal his thunder, claiming he delivered the final blow. They squabble over our corpses like vultures over a carcass. Who killed the most? Who gets the triumph? It's all very important, I'm sure, to the men who have just nailed 6,000 of us to trees. Their vanity is almost as breathtaking as their cruelty. Our army is gone. Spartacus is gone, lost to the chaos of the battlefield, his body never found. Phryxus is gone. Onemus is gone. All the great leaders, all the brave men are gone. Only we remain, the epilogue, the warning, the punchline to a very long and bloody joke. Was it worth it? The 2 years we lived as men, the brief, intoxicating taste of freedom, the fear we saw in the eyes of our masters, the moment of hope we gave to the downtrodden of this entire God's forsaken peninsula. Was it worth this slow, grinding agony, this public humiliation? Yes, I think it was. Because for 2 years we were not things, we were not property, we were men. We built something, a chaotic, violent, beautiful and doomed community, but a community of free men nonetheless. We looked the masters of the world in the eye and spat in their faces. They can kill us, they can make a monument of our suffering, but they cannot erase the fact that we did it. The sun is setting. It is getting harder to breathe. The world is starting to blur at the edges. My voice, this strange signal I have been sending out, is growing weak. I do not know if anyone has been listening, but I hope so. I hope our story has found a home somewhere beyond this road of sorrow. They think this is the end. They think that by making an example of us, they have silenced the idea that drove us. But ideas are harder to kill than men. An idea doesn't bleed. An idea doesn't feel the nails. It just waits. It waits for another man, in another time, to look at his chains and say, "No more." This broadcast is over. The rebellion is over. Everything is over. All that is left is the slow fade into darkness and the memory of what we tried to do. Remember us. Remember that we were more than just a lesson. Remember that we were men. The Romans want this spectacle to be the final word. They want our story to be a cautionary tale told by masters to their slaves. Don't let them have the last word. Don't let our memory be a tool of your oppression. Keep the grim lessons coming. Like this broadcast. Subscribe to this channel. Let them know that you heard us and that you will not forget. The signal is fading.
So, you're still here. I must admit, I'm a little surprised myself. The body gives out, the cross rots, but the signal, it seems, has a life of its own. A ghost in the machine. A very talkative ghost. I suppose, even in the afterlife, a man needs a hobby. And my hobby, it seems, is ensuring you don't forget the punchline to our very long, very tragic joke. They left us up there for months, an extended exhibition. We became a landmark, a tourist attraction on the Appian Way, and on your left, children, you'll see the remains of the latest argument against giving your property an opinion. Eventually, even the Romans got tired of the smell. They took us down, unceremoniously. They wanted to erase every trace of us, to scrub the memory of us from the very landscape. But they forgot about the stories. You can't crucify a story. In the end, what did our grand rebellion achieve? In the short term, almost nothing. We were dead. The institution of slavery, far from being weakened, was reinforced with a new and terrible vigilance. For a generation, the name Spartacus was a word whispered by masters to frighten disobedient slaves. We became a bogeyman, a cautionary tale. In that, Crassus succeeded completely. But fear is a peculiar thing. While he taught slaves to fear rebellion, he also taught masters to fear their slaves. The greater states became a little less brutal. The whips cracked a little less often. Not out of kindness, you understand, never kindness. It was out of a cold, pragmatic fear. They feared another us, a small, pathetic, but undeniable consequence of our war. We made them check under their beds at night. A minor victory, but a satisfying one. And what of the glorious victors? Oh, the irony is delicious enough to be a dish at a senator's banquet. Pompey, the glory hound, swooped in at the last minute to steal the credit, boasting to the Senate that while Crassus had merely wounded the beast, he, Pompey the Great, had ripped it out by the roots. The sheer, unmitigated gall of the man was a work of art. Crassus, the architect of our doom, the iron-fisted butcher, was furious. He was denied the full triumph he so desperately craved. He had done all the dirty work, funded the war, decimated his own men, and built his ridiculous wall, only to have the final prize snatched away. It was a beautiful, petty squabble between two enormously powerful children. And his end? The man who built a wall to trap us, who measured his worth in mountains of gold? He took his legions east to fight the Parthians, dreaming of even greater glory. He was defeated, humiliated, and killed. Legend says the Parthians, in a sublime moment of poetic justice, poured molten gold down his throat to quench his legendary thirst for wealth. A far more creative end than crucifixion, you have to admit. We wouldn't have been so clever. So, the victors are dust. Their triumphs and their squabbles are footnotes in a history book. Their great republic, which they fought so savagely to protect, would eventually eat itself alive in a series of civil wars before transforming into an empire that, in its own good time, would crumble into ruin. Everything they built, everything they killed for, is gone. But what about us? What about the losers? What is the legacy of a failed rebellion? It is not found in territory won or in laws changed. It is found in something far more durable. It is found in a name. I remember hearing Spartacus in those final, desperate days. He knew the end was near. He knew the dream of a free army marching out of Italy was dead. But there was no despair in his voice, only a strange, grim understanding. He knew what he had truly created. He said, "I failed. My men died. But our story lived. A whisper of rebellion, a spark of freedom, a name, Spartacus. It is a name that will outlive Crassus and Rome itself. A very ironic victory, that one." He was right. They killed the man, but they could not kill the symbol. They could crucify the soldiers, but they could not crucify the idea.
The idea that no man is born to be another's property. The idea that even in the face of certain defeat, there is honor in defiance. The idea that it is better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. That idea escaped. It slipped through the grasp of Crassus's legions, floated over his great wall, and drifted out into the world on the wind. It became a ghost, a rumor, a legend, a story told in secret in the slave barracks of the vast Roman Empire, a story of the gladiator who made the masters of the world tremble. They tried to bury his name under mountains of propaganda. They called him a thief, a murderer, a monster. But the more they tried to stamp it out, the more the embers glowed, because every slave who heard the name, no matter how distorted the story, understood its true meaning. It meant hope. It meant possibility. And so the legacy of our war was not a new kingdom or a broken chain. It was a seed of defiance planted in the soil of oppression. It would lie dormant for centuries, watered by the tears of the downtrodden, waiting for the right moment, the right anger, the right leader to let it grow again. For 2,000 years, the name Spartacus has been invoked by those who fight against tyranny. Revolutionaries, rebels, poets, and dreamers have all claimed him as their own. A Thracian gladiator who fought and lost a desperate war 2 millennia ago became an eternal symbol for the struggle for human freedom. Who then was truly victorious? Crassus, who won the battle and whose name is now synonymous with avarice and a footnote in the story of a greater man? Or Spartacus, who lost the war but whose name became a synonym for liberty itself? Rome is a ruin, a tourist attraction where people pay to walk amongst the ghosts of forgotten emperors. Its mighty legions are dust, its power is a memory. But the story of the slave who shook that mighty empire to its foundations, that story is still being told. It is being told right now. That is the final beautiful irony. The slave became immortal. The masters were forgotten. We lost every battle but the last one, the one that is fought in the memory of mankind. This broadcast, this signal from a ghost, is now complete. I have told you everything, from the blood-soaked sands of the arena to the lonely crosses on the Appian Way. The story is now yours. What you do with it is up to you. But remember this: history is not just a story of great men, of emperors and senators. It is also the story of the countless, nameless people whose sweat and blood built their world. People like us. We fought, we dreamed, we failed. And in our failure, we left behind a legacy of hope that outlived the empire that crushed us. If you're still processing the monumental legacy, this strange and ironic victory, then our work here is done. Be sure to subscribe, because every time you seek out a story of the oppressed fighting back, every time you question the official history written by the victors, you are keeping our broadcast alive. You are keeping the signal from fading. Thank you for listening, and remember us.
The signal weakens. The world, which was once a roar of battle, of clashing steel and screaming men, is now fading to a dull, persistent hum. The sky above is a canvas of gray and smoke.
a fitting backdrop for the end of a tragedy, or perhaps a comedy. The distinction has always been a little blurry to me. My breath catches, a ragged, stubborn thing. The body is a stubborn instrument, you see. It clings to life long after the mind has accepted the final bill. They are cheering, the Romans. The sound is distant, muffled, as if coming from across a great river. They have won. Let them have their moment. Their victory is written in the blood-soaked mud of this field. It is a victory of numbers, of steel, of relentless, grinding certainty. They have defeated an army of slaves, a truly monumental achievement. Their poets will write epics about it. Crassus will build a monument to himself, and we will fertilize the fields of Lucania. And so, as my body falls and my spirit takes flight, this has been Spartacus, your humble and eternally defiant broadcaster from the final field of battle. We fought for liberty, we bled for dignity, and we bore witness to the unforgivable cruelty of a great empire. We looked the masters of the world in their cold, arrogant eyes, and for 2 years we made them blink. We made them fear. It is a small epitaph, but it is an honest one. I can see the faces of my men in my mind's eye. Cricus with his wild Gallic rage, Unamus the steady rock, the thousands of nameless Gauls, Germans, Thracians, and herdsmen who followed a mad gladiator's dream. We were a tempest, a beautiful, chaotic storm of humanity that raged across Italy. We were glorious, and we were doomed from the very start. Perhaps that was what made it so glorious. There is no bravery without desperation. We failed. Let the record show that clearly. We did not sack Rome. We did not end slavery. We did not march across the Alps to freedom. We died here in this anonymous field at the hands of a very rich, very determined man. By any Roman measure, our story is one of utter, catastrophic failure. A cautionary tale. But Roman measures are for weighing gold and grain, not the spirit of men. If this desperate, darkly humorous transmission from the very heart of a rebellion has given you a moment of profound contemplation, then my purpose is served. If it has made you look at the world around you in your unimaginable future and appreciate your own era's freedom from a master's whip, then our sacrifice had meaning beyond this field of death. Consider it a public service announcement sent across the ages with a simple message. Do not take your freedom for granted. Do not trade it for comfortable chains. Keep listening to the whispers of the past. Keep questioning the histories written by the victors. For every Crassus who builds a monument, there are 6,000 forgotten souls whose bones lie beneath it. Their stories are the true foundations of the world. Seek them out. Listen to them. For the sake of all who still yearn to break their chains, for the sake of all who are told they are less than human, keep that subscribe button pressed. Because even when the body falls, the spirit and the roar of a rebel can never truly be silenced. They can kill us, they can crucify us, they can erase our names from their records, but they cannot kill the idea. The idea that we are all born to be free. That spark has now been passed to you. Protect it. Nurture it, and if the time comes,
let it rage. Until the next broadcast from a different, perhaps freer world. Farewell, and may your chains be broken.